You paid $1 for this place, but what you really bought was a decision. The wind howled like a wounded animal through the empty valley, rattling the wooden signpost that leaned crooked at the edge of the road. Elias Carter's horse stamped nervously, its breath clouding in the crisp Wyoming air. He'd been on the trail for 3 days, but it wasn't the cold that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. It was the house. The small wooden cabin sat at the end of a dirt path, like it had been waiting for him all along, squat, stubborn, and far too alive for something that had supposedly been abandoned. A faint column of smoke curled from the chimney. That wasn't in the deed. Elias tightened his grip on the reins, every instinct screaming that this wasn't what he'd signed up for. He'd come to Coyote Hollow to disappear, not to inherit somebody's mess. He swung down from his saddle, the crunch of his boots loud in the winter air. The door creaked in the wind like a whisper. Inside, a warm, flickering glow spilled through the cracks around the frame. Someone was in there. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd signed the papers at the courthouse barely an hour ago. Cash, no questions asked. A $1 deal. But looking at that house now, he realized the only thing cheaper than the price was how little he'd understood what he was buying. He slid his rifle from the saddle and moved slowly toward the porch. The steps groaned beneath his weight. His hand hovered just above the door handle. He didn't have to knock. The door was unlocked. The smell hit him first yeast and wood smoke. Bread. Fresh, still warm. Then he saw it, a table set for two, a small loaf on a cutting board, a child's crayon drawing tacked crookedly to the wall, a stick figure family standing beneath a smiling yellow sun. No one was supposed to live here. His boots thudded softly on the floorboards as he stepped inside, rifle at the ready. The fire crackled in the hearth, burning low. There was no sign of anyone. No footsteps, no shadows. Just that eerie, unsettling sense of being watched. Elias turned in a slow circle, scanning corners, checking for movement. That's when he heard it. A soft, steady voice behind him. Small. Fragile. Like a bell in winter, "Are you my new daddy?" His stomach clenched and he whipped around. A little girl stood in the doorway he'd just walked through, framed by the dying light outside. Her hair was black and braided neatly down her back. Her dress was worn but clean, the kind mothers mend by hand, because there's no money for new fabric. She couldn't have been more than 6. She stared at him like he was the answer to a question she'd been holding too long. Elias lowered the rifle, but his voice came out rough. "What did you just say?" She tilted her head, not afraid, not even curious, certain. "Are you my new daddy?" For a heartbeat, all he could hear was the wind scraping against the cabin walls. His chest tightened with something he didn't want to name. Not here. Not now. He cleared his throat. "No, kid. I'm not," he stopped. "Where's your mama?" The girl's eyes, big and impossibly steady, filled with tears that didn't fall. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her small hands held it out to him like it was the most important thing in the world. "She left this for my new daddy," she whispered. "That's you, isn't it?" Elias hesitated. His fingers brushed against the worn paper as he took it. His name wasn't on it. But something told him the moment he unfolded it, his life would no longer belong to him alone. The letter was written in a woman's careful hand. "My name is Hannah Foster. If you're reading this, it means you bought this house. My daughter Clara is here. I can't give her the life she deserves. The bank was going to take everything anyway. At least this way she has a roof and maybe someone who will care for her better than I can. Please don't judge me. I did this because I love her. Elias swallowed hard, the words burning against the raw places inside him. He'd come to Wyoming because he had nothing left. His wife, his boy, they'd been gone 2 years now. Fever took them. Guilt kept him alive. And now a stranger had just asked him to be a father again. His hands trembled as he folded the letter and knelt down in front of the girl. She met his eyes without flinching. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Foster." He exhaled long and shaky. "Clara, your mama's not coming back, is she?" She shook her head, a tiny motion. "She said my new daddy would take care of me." Elias had no words for that, just the cold, steady beat of his heart against the ribs of a man who hadn't planned on feeling again. For a long time they sat in silence, fire popping softly, wind pushing against the window panes, a house bought for $1 and a decision worth far more than that. Finally, he stood and walked toward the window and froze. Dust rose in the distance, a low rumble, the sound of hooves cutting through the cold. 3 dark riders were making their way up the path. Elias's grip tightened on the edge of the curtain. "Clara," he said quietly, "you need to get behind the table." Her eyes widened. She obeyed without a sound. It wasn't the first time she'd been told to hide from strangers. Outside, the riders drew closer, their silhouettes sharp against the burning sky. 1 in front, 2 behind. Men who didn't knock to ask permission. He leaned the rifle against his shoulder, steadying his breath. He hadn't fired a gun since the day everything in his life went to hell. But that was a different time. This was now. He glanced down at Clara, crouched small and silent. Her tiny hand clutched the hem of her dress. He didn't know why, but in that moment, Elias Carter made a choice. He wasn't walking away. The pounding on the door rattled the hinges. A hard, commanding voice followed. "Open up, Carter. We know you're in there." Elias's jaw clenched. He didn't recognize the voice, but he knew the type. Men who believed they could take what they wanted. He lowered the curtain and stepped to the door. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The pounding came again. Last chance. Elias lifted the rifle just enough so they'd see it when the door opened. He cracked the door an inch, eyes narrowing at the man in front. Thick beard, cold grin gun at his hip. The other 2 flanked him, hands near their weapons. The leader's grin widened. "Well, ain't this something? The new owner." "I don't know who you are," Elias said, voice low and even, "but you're trespassing." The man's grin didn't falter. "Name's Bo Granger. Hannah Foster owes a debt, and since you own the house now, I figure you might know where she is." "She's not here." "That's so," he leaned forward. "Then you won't mind if we take a little look around." Elias tightened his grip on the door. "You're not stepping inside." The standoff hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Then Bo's eyes slid past Elias, scanning the interior. He noticed the warm fire, the bread, the drawings on the wall. And something in his expression changed, a slow, deliberate cruelty. "Cute," he drawled. "Shame if anything happened to it." Elias's blood went cold. The other 2 shifted, hands now resting on their gun belts. Outside, the wind carried a coyote's distant cry. For a heartbeat, it was just breath and tension. Bo smirked. "We'll be back." The 3 men turned their horses and rode off into the dying light dust, trailing behind like a warning. Elias let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Clara peeked from behind the table, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Who were they?" she asked. "Trouble," he said. His voice came out like gravel. And they'll be back. The sun had dipped below the horizon now. The house that had felt eerie an hour ago suddenly felt too small, too exposed. And as the fire cracked lower, Elias understood something with the weight of inevitability. That dollar he spent wasn't for a house. It was for a fight. The fire had burned low, throwing long, twitching shadows across the floor. Elias sat hunched at the edge of the table, the paper in his hand growing softer, at the creases worn from how often he had refolded it. Outside, the wind still carried the echo of departing hooves, but inside the house was too quiet. Not peaceful, just waiting. Clara sat across from him, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, like she'd been taught manners but hadn't had much reason to use them. She looked tired, but not scared. That bothered him. Fear might have meant she didn't grow up expecting men like Beau Granger to show up at her door. Elias set the letter down carefully, as if it might shatter. "Where'd you sleep last night?" he asked more gruffly than he meant to. She pointed toward a modest room just off the kitchen. "Mama's bed," she said softly. "She said I could keep it warm until she got back, but—" Her voice trailed off. She wasn't going to finish that sentence, and he didn't blame her. Elias rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion pulling at the edges of his mind. He hadn't slept properly in days, and now this girl, this house, this whole damn mess was pressing against the part of him that had tried so hard to shut the door on the past. She didn't cry. Not once. That unnerved him too. He stood, walked slowly to the front window, and watched the last tendrils of twilight slip behind the hills. "Clara," he said, not turning around. "Do you know where your mama went?" Clara hesitated. "She didn't tell me. Not even a hint. She said she had to find help." Clara's voice tightened, and for the first time her eyes shifted away from his. "She said, if someone good bought the house, they'd take care of me. She said, you'd be good." Elias turned toward her, then heart aching from how much hope she packed into those last two words. Like she didn't just want to believe it, she needed to. "Mama said, if you found this letter," Clara murmured, reaching to tap the paper lying between them, "you were meant to find me too." He let those words sit in the air for a moment, like they had a weight to them, like the universe had passed the burden to his shoulders and dared him to shrug it off. "I came here to be alone," Elias said, more to himself than to her. Clara looked at him. "But you're not." That simple reply cut deeper than anything a grown man had said to him in years. Elias sat down again, the old chair creaking beneath his weight. "Your mama ever talk about someone named Tate?" Clara nodded. "He came once. Mama made me hide. I think she cried after he left. And Beau Granger." She swallowed. "He came after Tate. He was worse." Elias frowned. Worse how Clara paused, thinking carefully. Tate scared her with papers. Beau scared her with guns. He didn't ask more. He already hated both men without knowing the full story. What mattered now was keeping Clara safe and understanding just what kind of trouble Hannah Foster had been running from. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded, but didn't move. "Go on," he said. "That bread won't eat itself." Clara moved cautiously, as if waiting for permission that might still be revoked. She tore off a piece of bread and sat back down, chewing slowly. Elias stared at the fireplace for a long while before speaking again. "I need to go into town tomorrow," he said. "Talk to the marshal. I'll leave you here just for a bit." Clara tensed. "What if they come back?" "I don't think they will. Not right away. But I'll show you how to hide just in case." "I already know how," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long time. She stared down at her bread like it held all the answers. After they ate, Elias pulled an old blanket from the trunk at the end of the hallway and laid it out on the floor near the hearth. "You can take the bed," he said, "but it's your house." He smiled faintly. "Only legally." As Clara curled up under the quilt, Elias sat nearby, rifle across his knees, the fire dying down beside him. The cabin was warm, but he felt the cold in his bones. He didn't sleep. Not really. Because somewhere around midnight, he heard it again. Not hooves, not wind. Footsteps. He grabbed his rifle and rose, silently moving to the door. Nothing. Just night. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched stayed with him. By dawn, he was already packed. He left Clara with clear instructions and food, plus a small knife, not for fighting, but just in case. Be faithful. She promised to stay hidden if anyone came. He rode into Coyote Hollow with a heart full of questions and a mind trying to outrun its own answers. The town was little more than a stretch of dust and stubborn buildings. General store, saloon, livery stable, church sheriff's office. A row of weathered homes, all wearing the weight of a hard winter. Elias dismounted and tied his horse at the post outside the marshal's office. The wooden sign above the door was faded but legible: Whitlock, Territorial Lawman. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Marshal Whitlock looked up from a desk cluttered with papers and a half-eaten biscuit. He was tall, lean, graying at the temples, and gave off the air of a man who didn't flinch easy. "You Carter?" he asked, setting the biscuit down. Elias nodded. "How'd you know Beau Granger was in here last night?" "Said you were squatting on a property he's got interest in." Elias narrowed his eyes. "I bought that house. Legal deed. $1 courthouse stamped." Whitlock leaned back in his chair. "Don't doubt it. But you stirred up a hornet's nest." "Girl's name is Clara Foster," Elias said. "Her mama left her with the house. Said she had no choice. Abandonment's a crime." Whitlock muttered, then paused when he saw Elias's face. "That's not judgment, Carter. That's the law." "The law doesn't always mean right," Elias said, jaw tight. Whitlock studied him. "You're not wrong, but it's the frame we hang justice on." Elias pulled the folded letter from his coat and handed it over. Whitlock read in silence. When he finished, he didn't speak right away. "Let me guess," the marshal said finally. "You didn't come here planning to be anyone's savior." "I came here not planning anything at all." Whitlock stood, grabbed his coat, and motioned to the door. "Come on. You'd best see something." They walked across the street to the general store where a bulletin board stood with faded notices. Whitlock tapped one of them. A wanted poster. Harlan Tate. Loan extortion fraud. Suspected, no reward. No charges yet filed. But plenty of suspicion. "Sounds like you just walked into the middle of a storm," Whitlock said. "I don't care about storms," Elias replied. "I care about that little girl." The marshal looked at him a long moment, then nodded. "I'll give you 48 hours, he said. "Keep the girl safe. But Carter, if this blows back, it won't just be your fight." Elias turned toward the door. "Then I'd better be ready." As they stepped outside, the sky cracked open with light, and from the west, down the main road, a black coach rumbled toward town, dust churning behind it. Whitlock narrowed his eyes. "That's Tate's men. Looks like the devil's coming early." Elias clenched his fists. His time was running out, and Clara's life was tied to what he did next. The coach wheels ground to a halt outside Elias's cabin just after noon. The wind had shifted by then, calmer, but carrying with it the bitter cold of something unspoken, like the land itself was holding its breath. Elias stood in the doorway, rifle close, boots planted. He'd spent the morning chopping wood, checking the roof, watching the road. Clara stayed quiet inside. She didn't ask questions. She knew better. She sat with a blanket wrapped around her, clutching the small cloth doll her mother had stitched from scraps. 3 riders had come into view before the coach even settled, trotting alongside it, like wolves flanking a wagon. One of them Elias recognized right away. Beau Granger. He dismounted with the cocky ease of a man who'd never been told no. His boots crunched through the frost-bitten dirt as he approached. The 2 men behind him, young, lean, mean-looking, kept their hands near their guns. They wore smiles that didn't touch their eyes. Elias stepped down from the porch slowly, his rifle still lowered but visible. Beau tilted his head. "Mr. Carter, looking real settled in for someone squatting on disputed property." "I'm not squatting," Elias said flatly. "I have the deed." Beau didn't answer right away. He pulled off one glove and rubbed his beard. Then he smiled. "Debts don't disappear just because the mother ran," he said loud enough for anyone within 50 yards to hear. "Sometimes we collect in other ways." Elias didn't flinch, but something behind his ribs tightened hot and slow. "I told you yesterday," he said evenly. "Hannah Foster isn't here, and this house belongs to me now." Beau laughed short and sharp. "That's what the paper says. But paper burns easy." He stepped onto the porch, a challenge in every step. Elias didn't move back. "You're not welcome here." "Well now," Beau said, eyeing the house. "That's a shame. We came all this way. Thought we might come inside, take a look around. Make sure you're not hiding anything. Or anyone." The way he said it made Elias's knuckles tighten around the stock of his rifle. Beau's grin stretched. "You know, Mr. Carter, I always hated liars. And I especially hate men who lie about little girls." That was it. Elias lifted the rifle just enough. He didn't aim, not yet. But the shift in weight spoke louder than words. Beau's men stiffened behind him, hands twitching at their belts. "I said no." Elias growled. "Step back." Beau stared at him for a long second. His smile faded. Then slowly he raised his hands in mock surrender. "All right. All right. No need to ruffle feathers." He turned, but only half. "One more thing," he said, voice now low and dangerous. "You know who owns your mortgage now? That'd be Mr. Harlan Tate. And you don't want to owe that man a damn thing." Elias didn't respond. He kept the barrel low but firm. Beau walked back to his horse, mounted slow, like he was making sure Elias saw every move. One of the younger men spit into the dirt before climbing back into the saddle. As the coach started rolling again, Beau tipped his hat mockingly. "See you soon, Carter." Elias stood there until they were gone. Inside, Clara stepped out from behind the bedroom door, where she'd hidden without being told. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, but his jaw was tight. "Yeah, I'm fine." Clara came closer, her doll hugged to her chest. "They're gonna come back, aren't they?" He didn't lie. "Probably." Clara looked down. "Mama said people like that always come back. She said they only leave when someone makes them." Elias crouched to meet her eye level. "Well then," he said, "I guess we better be the ones to make them." Clara smiled faintly, and for a moment something warm flickered in her eyes. Later that day, Elias returned to town. He met Marshal Whitlock again, this time not to report a threat, but to make a plan. They showed up, Elias said, pacing the office. Beau Granger and 2 others. Said they were representing Harlan Tate. Claimed he owns Hannah Foster's debt. Whitlock rubbed his temples. Tate's name keeps showing up on the wrong side of complaints. Trouble is, he's got friends in Cheyenne, judges, bankers, and enough legal paper to drown a man in ink. I don't care about his paper, Elias said. He's coming for Clara. You got proof of that, only my eyes, and a girl too scared to sleep. Whitlock stood and crossed the room, unlocking a drawer. He pulled out a worn leather folder and handed Elias a piece of parchment. A warrant unfiled. You're not the first to complain about Tate, Whitlock said. But no one's stuck yet. If you've got something more, letters, ledgers, proof of coercion, you bring it to me. I might, Elias said. Clara's mama left a box, full of papers, contracts, maybe letters. Whitlock raised an eyebrow. That might just be what we need. Elias left the office just as the sun started to dip again. He didn't stop at the saloon, didn't speak to anyone else, but someone was watching. From across the street, tucked in the shadow of the general store awning, a young woman stood with her arms crossed. Ruthie Granger. She'd heard every word exchanged inside the marshal's office, and for the first time in her life she didn't like what she heard her brother's name attached to. She watched Elias ride out of town, watched the way he carried himself, like a man being dragged into something he didn't ask for, but refusing to let go now that he was in it. That night, Elias sat by the fire again, cleaning his rifle with slow, methodical care. Clara curled up nearby, sleeping lightly, the doll tucked under her arm. The box Hannah had left sat on the table unopened since the night before. Elias stared at it, wondering what truths were folded between those pages. What secrets might finally give him leverage against men like Harlan Tate? He had no idea just how deep those pages would cut. But he knew this much: this fight wasn't going away. And the next time Tate came knocking, he wouldn't be sending a warning. The next morning came with the kind of stillness Elias didn't trust. Snow hadn't fallen, but the frost hung thick across the field grass like a shroud, and the sun struggled to cut through the haze. Inside the cabin, the fire had died down to glowing embers. Elias stirred it back to life, watching the sparks catch like thoughts he couldn't hold on to. Clara was still asleep, curled up under two patched quilts, her small hand clutching the corner of her doll's dress. She looked peaceful, but Elias knew better. Peace for her was only ever temporary. He'd spent half the night sorting through the box Hannah had left behind. Contracts, loan terms, duplicates of bank documents bearing Harlan Tate's seal, and notes in Hannah's handwriting. Names, addresses, timelines. A pattern started to form, ugly and sharp. Tate wasn't just a loan shark. He was building something. A quiet empire made of desperation. Elias folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his satchel. Then he stepped out into the cold. Back in town, Marshal Whitlock was already awake, reading a telegraph inside the office with a scowl on his face. He looked up as Elias entered, his breath fogging in the cold air between them. "I was just about to send for you," Whitlock said, holding out the telegram. "Thought you'd want to see this." Elias took it. His eyes skimmed the lines. His jaw clenched. Cheyenne says Tate's debts are private property, secured and enforceable under territorial lending law. Whitlock nodded. He's covered. Legally, mostly. But what? The marshal leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. The man leaves behind bruises the law can't see. That's where we catch him if we're lucky. Elias laid the satchel on the table and opened it. The marshal leaned forward, whistling low. "Well now, that's more than luck." Elias spread the documents out across the desk. Loan terms at 40% interest, compounded monthly. And this, he tapped a paper bearing Tate's signature, is a deed transfer from another family. Same setup. He's been doing this all over the county. Whitlock studied the pages in silence. Then he picked one up and read aloud, "Borrower agrees to forfeit property and/or family labor in the event of default." Family labor. Jesus. He's using women and children to pay off debts they could never escape, Elias said. "You got testimony from Hannah?" "Not yet." Whitlock's expression hardened. "Then we don't have a case." Elias didn't argue. The facts were clear. Without Hannah, these were just documents. Maybe enough to cast doubt, but not enough to prosecute. "She'll come back," Elias said, though he didn't know if he believed it. Whitlock nodded slowly. "Let's hope she does before he gets bolder." He stood and grabbed his coat. "Come on, you need to see this." They stepped outside into the cold boots crunching on frost as Whitlock led him up the street toward the general store. Outside, a few townsfolk stood talking in hushed tones. They parted when the marshal and Elias approached. Whitlock pointed to a flyer nailed to the post by the store entrance. It was new. Fresh ink, clean paper. Notice of reclamation. Property under lien. Hannah Foster defaulted, new lien holder, Harlan Tate Holdings, LLC. Elias read it twice before he spoke. "This is fake. Fake enough to fool a court," Whitlock replied, "until we prove otherwise." Elias looked at the crowd. Most turned away, avoiding his gaze. "You said you'd give me 48 hours. Whitlock looked tired. "I did. But Carter, you need to understand something." He stepped in close, lowered his voice. "You might be right, son. But the law doesn't always side with what's right." Elias didn't answer. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked away, the flyer still burning in his hand. Back at the cabin, Clara was waiting by the window when he returned. She watched him dismount, her expression unreadable. "Were you scared while I was gone?" he asked gently, as he stepped inside. She shook her head. "Not really." "You sure?" Clara hesitated. "I had my hiding spot. And Mama said, if the fire kept going, it meant you were coming back." Elias knelt beside her, studying her face. "Your mama tell you anything else about Tate?" Clara's brow furrowed. "She said he lies with money. Said he talks like a preacher, but moves like a snake." Elias almost smiled. "That sounds about right." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "I forgot I found this in the box, too. It's not one of the papers. It's a letter." He opened it carefully. It was written in Hannah's hand, addressed not to him, but to Clara. "If you're reading this, baby, it means I had to leave you behind. Not forever. Just long enough to make them pay. You're brave. Braver than me. I just need a little more time. Trust him. He won't leave you." Elias exhaled hard, pressing his palm over the letter. She hadn't run. She was fighting. And she'd chosen Elias to hold the line until she returned. He looked back at Clara, something new settling behind his eyes. "I need you to help me with something," he said. "Those papers. We need to make copies. Get them ready. For the marshal. For the truth." Clara nodded. No hesitation. They spent the afternoon laying everything out, organizing, labeling. Clara helped, her little fingers surprisingly deft with ink and twine. Elias realized she was smarter than he'd given her credit for. Quiet, yes, but sharp. By dusk, they had a stack of evidence bound and ready. Elias packed the satchel again, double-checked the locks on the windows, stoked the fire high. That night, he barely slept. Because just after midnight, the sound of horses came again. Only this time there was no knock, no warning. just the glint of firelight catching on boots outside his window, and a voice cold and familiar calling out from the dark, "Mr. Carter." "We need to talk." Elias rose from the chair, slowly rifle in hand. Clara stayed still beneath the covers, her eyes open in the dark. Elias stepped toward the door, knowing exactly who was on the other side. Not Beau, not one of his dogs. It was Harlan Tate. Elias didn't open the door right away. He stood there, heart steady but heavy, listening through the wood. The voice had come calm, crisp, too calm for a man used to being denied. No pounding, no threats, just a quiet announcement of presence. That made it worse. He slipped the rifle off the wall and moved to the window. Outside, the porch glowed faintly under the sliver moonlight. 3 horses, 1 man standing. Harlan Tate. He was tall, well-fed, dressed like a man who knew how to look expensive without looking ridiculous. Long coat, polished boots, clean-shaven but with that smug confidence only wealth can teach. He was holding his gloves, not wearing them. Not a man worried about frostbite or gunfire. Elias eased the door open just enough for voices to pass through. "You brought a lot of horse for a conversation," he said. Tate smiled like it was a compliment. "You know how it is. The more hands you have, the lighter the burden." Elias stepped fully into the doorway, rifle visible, not raised. "You came a long way in the dark just to say hello." "I came because my patience has limits," Tate replied evenly. "And yours, Mr. Carter, is beginning to test them." Elias didn't blink. "The girl stays." "I haven't asked for the girl," Tate said, though the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. "I'm here for what belongs to me. That house, that land. And every page of paper Hannah Foster left behind." Elias let the silence stretch between them. Finally, Tate sighed like a man bored with formality. "Let me be plain, then. She owed me money, a great deal of it. And since she so generously transferred her only asset to you, the debt by certain interpretations transfers too. Fraudulent conveyance, they call it. Very fashionable term these days. That house was sold legal and clear. I've got the deed." "Oh, I'm sure you do. But you see..." Tate stepped forward, boots crisp on frozen earth. "The law isn't about what's fair. It's about what's provable. And what I have," he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick leather folder, "is enough to get a judge to freeze the property claim. It was a debt dodge and tie you up in court until Clara's old enough to testify against you." Elias didn't take the folder. "You're bluffing." Tate smiled wider. "Mr. Carter, I never bluff. Bluffing is for gamblers. I make sure the house always wins." Elias didn't like how easily the man used Clara's name, like she was already on some ledger in his head. "Tell me something," Elias said, voice low. "What exactly was the payment plan if Hannah defaulted? You take her land or her daughter?" Tate's smile didn't waver. "I never take what's not legally mine. I simply create terms that make compliance unlikely. You prey on the desperate. I provide solutions to the desperate. It's not my fault if desperation comes with cost." "You don't want this fight," Elias warned. "I already have it." Tate raised the folder again. "You've got till the end of the week to vacate and surrender the documents, or I file the claim. And Clara, she'll go where she belongs, with the state, or to a family that can afford to keep her, not some broken-down widower playing house with someone else's child." Elias felt the words hit harder than he expected. The weight of them landed squarely in the place he'd been trying not to feel, where the ghost of his wife and son still lived. But he didn't look away. "She's not someone else's anything," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Tate's smile thinned. He saw it, then saw the resolve. Maybe he hadn't expected Elias to be so rooted. Maybe he thought guilt would make him easier to move. "You've made your position clear," Tate said, stepping back. "I'll leave you to sleep on it." He turned gloved hands, flicking the reins as he mounted. His men followed silent as shadows. Within seconds, they vanished down the trail, hooves muffled by frost and distance. Elias stood there long after they were gone. Inside, Clara was awake. She was sitting on the stairs, half shrouded in darkness, arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes met his the moment he stepped in. "He was going to take me," she said softly. "No," Elias replied. "He was going to try." Clara's voice wavered. "Why does he want us so bad?" Elias closed the door, bolted it, then sat beside her. "He doesn't want you. He wants control, and people who have nothing are easier to break." She nodded slowly, but there was something else in her expression, an awareness she didn't speak aloud. She was only 6, but no stranger to being cornered. "You're not going to give me up, are you?" she asked. "No," Elias said. "Never." She leaned against him, then head on his arm. Her trust simple and heavy. It scared him more than Tate ever could. They stayed like that until the fire burned low again. The next day, Elias returned to the marshal's office, the folder of documents in hand. Whitlock was pacing when he arrived, already agitated. "You met him." "He met me," Elias corrected. "Middle of the night. Smooth as ever." Whitlock didn't look surprised. "He's in town now. Checked into the inn across from the livery. Said he's here on business, but I think he's testing waters, seeing how much he can push without firing a shot." "I've got something he wants," Elias said, dropping the satchel on the desk. "And I'm not giving it up." The marshal opened the flap, pulled out a stack of papers, and whistled low. "Ledger copies, loan terms, signatures." "Damn. This is cleaner than I expected." "It's a start," Elias said. "But we still need Hannah. She's the one piece that makes this real in a courtroom." "She's coming back," Elias said. "She has to." Whitlock studied him for a long moment. "You're not just protecting the girl anymore," he said. Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. He left the office just as a black carriage rolled through town. Tate again. Watching. Always watching. Elias didn't flinch. He had one more visit to make. That night after Clara was asleep, he saddled his horse and rode east toward the chapel, toward the one man who might understand what came next, not just with guns and law, but with faith. He needed Father Tom Callahan, because something was coming, and it would take more than one man to stop it. The chapel sat at the edge of Coyote Hollow, half swallowed by a tangle of pine and rock that looked older than the town itself, weathered, leaning but still standing, kind of like the man who kept it alive. Elias tied off his horse and approached the chapel door under the dull light of a dying moon. The bell didn't ring. It never did unless Father Tom Callahan rang it himself. He didn't have to knock. The old priest was already sitting on the steps, wrapped in a wool coat pipe in hand, staring into the dark, like it owed him answers. "Didn't think I'd see you out this way," Father Tom said, without turning his head. "You always say that," Elias replied. "That's because every time you show up, something's broken." Elias sat down next to him with a sigh. "Yeah. And this time, it ain't just me." Tom took a slow draw on his pipe, then handed it to Elias. Elias shook his head. "Quit it years ago." "Shame," Tom muttered. "It helps with judgment. Sometimes softens the edges. The wind whispered through the trees, stirring the old wooden cross that hung above the door. It creaked like bones. For a few moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "There's a girl," he said. Tom grunted. "Figured. You got the look." What look? The kind a man wears when he's protecting something smaller than himself. Usually means his heart's getting involved. Dangerous territory. She's not mine. But you wish she was. Elias didn't answer. Tom turned toward him, eyes sharp under bushy gray brows. "What's her name?" "Clara. 6 years old. Smart as hell. Brave, too. Her mama left her with a letter and a house deed sold for $1. That's some heavy paper for a little girl to carry." Elias nodded. And now she's got a man like Harlan Tate trying to rip it out of her hands. Tom spat in the dirt. Tate. I should have known. That man's soul is rotted. Always walks into a room like he already owns it. He's trying to steal Clara's life before it even starts. And I'm trying not to let him. The priest gave him a sidelong glance. "You know what that makes you a fool, no?" Tom smiled faintly. "It makes you dangerous to the kind of men who think money gives them power over the weak." Elias looked down at his hands. "He knows about my past. About Ella and Will. He's using it, trying to dig under my skin, make me feel like I don't deserve to raise someone else's child." "Do you believe him?" Elias didn't answer. Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, son. Regret doesn't disqualify a man. It's what you do with it that matters. You couldn't save your own family, Elias. Maybe this is your chance to stop running." That landed harder than Elias expected. He sat with it, staring out at the dark trees. Then he nodded once. "There's more," he said. "Clara's mother left a box of documents. Enough to bury Tate if we can get the right judge. The marshal's on our side, but we still don't have Hannah. We need her to testify. You think she's still alive? I do." Tom stood slowly, knees cracking, and opened the chapel door. The warm glow of lantern light spilled out onto the cold steps. "Then I'll pray she finds her way back," he said. "And in the meantime, I'll spread word quietly. There are still a few folks in this town who remember what right looks like." Elias followed him inside. He didn't stay long, just enough to warm his hands and his resolve. When he returned home, the cabin was quiet. Clara was curled up under the quilt, fast asleep. But someone else had been there. A fresh bundle of kindling sat by the fire, and a piece of pie on the table. He frowned. A note was tucked beneath the plate. "She's watching. I'm not proud of what Beau's doing. You're not alone in this. R.G. Ruthie Granger." Elias sat down at the table, picked up the note again. Ruthie had been quiet since Beau started working with Tate. Everyone assumed she was just going along with it. Maybe they'd assumed wrong. The next morning, Elias took the note and the documents to Marshal Whitlock. They locked the originals in the office safe and made plans to send copies to Cheyenne. Then they began organizing what Whitlock called quiet testimony, asking the townsfolk who had suffered under Tate to step forward anonymously at first. Some refused, some didn't. It was enough to rattle the wrong people. By midday, Tate's coach was parked right outside the marshal's office. Elias stood by the window as Tate stepped out, dressed in black with silver cufflinks glinting like fangs. Beau Granger followed behind him, eyes twitching. Inside, Whitlock loaded his revolver and holstered it without a word. Tate walked in like he was entering his parlor. Calm, controlled, cruel. "Marshal," he greeted, smiling faintly. "Mr. Carter." Whitlock gave a nod, but didn't offer a chair. "What can we do for you?" the marshal asked. "I've come to resolve this matter before it gets unnecessarily complicated," Tate said smoothly. "You've got documents I consider stolen, a girl illegally held, and a property I intend to reclaim." "We have a legal deed signed and witnessed," Elias said. "We also have evidence of predatory lending fraud and coercion." Tate smirked. "From whom? A missing mother, an outlaw preacher, a broken rancher with a guilty conscience." Elias stepped forward. "Try me." Tate's expression flickered. "Just for a second." "Let me be clear," he said. "This isn't personal. It's business." "That's your mistake," Elias replied. "Because to us it's very personal." Tate adjusted his cufflinks. "You have until sundown tomorrow to turn over everything. After that, I file charges in Cheyenne. Fraud, conspiracy, harboring a child in violation of territorial law." Whitlock crossed his arms. "You'd better be careful, Harlan. Because if even one of those charges doesn't stick, I'm coming for you with every law this territory still believes in." Tate raised an eyebrow. "A challenge?" No, the marshal said. "A guarantee." Tate turned without another word and left the office. But before the door shut, he paused. "I wonder," he said over his shoulder, "what Clara would say in front of a judge." The door clicked shut behind him. Elias turned to Whitlock. "He's getting desperate." Whitlock nodded. "Desperate men get reckless." Outside, the air grew colder. The sun had started to drop behind the hills, casting long shadows down the dirt street. Back at the cabin, Clara was waiting by the fire. Elias crouched beside her and handed her a warm mug of tea. "I went to see the preacher," he said. Clara looked up. "Did he say anything?" "Yeah," Elias replied. "He said maybe I should stop running." Clara nodded like that made perfect sense. Outside in the distance, a horse's hooves echoed faintly. Someone was approaching, again. And this time it wasn't Tate. The knock came soft, hesitant. Elias opened the door slowly, rifle not raised but visible in hand. The woman on the porch didn't flinch. She wore a threadbare shawl and a look that didn't match the clothes, like someone used to surviving in silence but tired of staying quiet. "Evenin'," she said. He narrowed his eyes, studying her face. It took him a moment to place her beau's younger sister. Ruthie Granger. He hadn't seen her in months, not since before the Granger boys started running Tate's errands. She was younger than Beau by 10 years, but older in spirit. Too many nights hiding bruises that weren't hers. "Miss Granger," Elias said cautiously. "Everything all right?" She glanced past him into the house. "Is the girl here?" Elias didn't move. "Why?" "Because I don't want what's comin' to land on her." He studied her again. Her voice was steady, but her fingers were clenched tight around the edges of her shawl. "Come in," he said finally. She stepped inside, eyes darting around the cabin, not like a thief, but like someone cataloging exits. Clara peeked from the bedroom doorway, hesitated, then slowly stepped into view. Ruthie offered a small, soft smile. "Hey there, honey. You don't remember me, but I was the one used to sneak candy into church when your mama wasn't looking." Clara tilted her head. "You're Beau's sister." Ruthie nodded and the smile faded. "Yeah, I am." Clara's eyes didn't leave her. She didn't smile back. Elias cleared his throat. "Why are you here, Ruthie?" She didn't sit, just stood by the hearth warming her hands like she didn't expect to stay long. "I heard Harlan Tate's coming back tomorrow. Heard he's bringing papers. Maybe men." "He already brought both," Elias said. "We had a talk." Ruthie looked at him. And you're still standin' barely. She nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you had someone standin' with you. Elias narrowed his eyes. Go on. She took a shaky breath. I kept quiet because Bo told me to. Said it was just business. But the other night I heard him talkin' with Tate. They weren't talkin' about land. They were talkin' about her. She looked toward Clara, who had silently crossed to Elias's side. What did they say? Elias asked. That the debt didn't need money to be settled. That foster law's thin out here. That if Hannah doesn't come back, Tate could claim the girl was abandoned and take her as collateral. Elias's face darkened. I thought Bo was just stupid, Ruthie continued. But this is evil. He glanced down at Clara, who was listening in that quiet way she always did, wide-eyed, too still for her age. You know what happens to girls Tate takes in? Ruthie asked. He calls it work. Says he's given 'em a future. But none of them ever come back. Clara turned into Elias's coat, hiding her face. He wrapped an arm around her jaw, clenched. Why are you telling me this now? He asked Ruthie. Her chin lifted. Because if you're going to fight him, you'll need more than prayers and paper. You'll need witnesses, names, patterns. I've got 'em. You're willing to go on record, I'm willing to go to war. For a moment, no one spoke. The fire cracked. Outside, a gust of wind howled through the trees like it wanted in. Elias met her eyes. Then we start tonight. They sat at the table while Clara drifted off in the armchair by the hearth. Ruthie pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket notes in her own hand. Names of girls Tate had employed. Ledger entries Bo brought home late at night. Copies of receipts and coded payments. Enough to paint a map of Harlan Tate's rot. Elias added the pages to the growing file he and the marshal had been building. Every name a story. Every mark a nail in Tate's coffin. You could have run, Elias said. You still can. Ruthie's hands curled into fists. I ran once. Left a good family behind. Found myself living under Bo's roof. I made peace with my shame. But I won't make peace with this. He nodded once. Then tomorrow we testify. And if Tate tries anything, Elias didn't hesitate. He'll find out what happens when the prey stops running. She left before dawn, slipping into the shadows behind the barn unseen. Her steps were quiet, but her mind burned with certainty. Back inside, Elias watched the sun rise through the frost-covered window. Clara stirred and rubbed her eyes. Was that the lady who left the pie? She asked. Yeah, Elias said. She's with us now. Clara didn't ask more. She just nodded like she understood the rules of this war even better than the adults. That afternoon, Elias returned to town. At the marshal's office, he handed over Ruthie's notes. Whitlock read them in silence, then stood and locked the door behind him. This is it, he said. This tips it. You sure? The marshal looked tired but certain. I can take this to Judge Merritt in Casper. He's one of the few still clean. If we get him to sign an emergency order, we can block any move Tate tries to make before he even files. When do we go tonight? You ride with me? Elias nodded. And Clara? She stays with me until we get back, said a voice behind them. It was Father Tom stepping through the back door with a satchel of books and a revolver at his hip. You think I'm letting the girl out of sight while you play lawyers and outlaws? Think again. Elias almost smiled. You always show up at the right time. Tom winked. I follow the light. That evening, Elias saddled up with Whitlock and rode north under a blanket of stars. The road to Casper would take all night, But what waited at the end was the key to keeping Clara safe and putting an end to Tate's grip on Coyote Hollow. Back in the cabin, Father Tom read Clara stories by the fire while Ruthie kept watch at the window shotgun across her lap. Clara sat quietly drawing. "What are you making?" Ruthie asked. Clara held up the page. It was a house drawn in simple lines, smoke rising from the chimney, 3 stick figures standing outside. A tall man, a small girl, and a woman with long hair holding their hands. Clara smiled. "It's our home. When Mama comes back." Ruthie blinked fast, looking away before the tears caught. Outside, coyotes called in the distance and the moon rose silver over the valley. Tomorrow would bring fire, but tonight they had hope. It was just after sunrise when the knock came. Father Tom froze, spoon halfway to his mouth, oatmeal steaming in the tin bowl before him. Ruthie rose from her seat by the window, her hand already on the shotgun. Clara, still wrapped in blankets on the floor near the hearth, blinked slowly awake, her fingers tightening around her doll. Another knock. Firmer this time. Not aggressive, not cautious. Just familiar. Ruthie gave Tom a look, and he nodded once. She moved to the door, unbolted it, and opened it just wide enough to see. She gasped. Holy God. Tom stood up fast. Clara sat up straighter, watching. Ruthie pulled the door open fully. There, standing on the porch, with mud on her hem, a cut above her brow, and eyes rimmed in exhaustion and fire, was Hannah Foster. Mama Clara's voice was barely more than a whisper. Hannah's eyes snapped to her daughter. She let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a breath. Her hands shook. "Yes, baby. I'm here." Clara ran. Hannah dropped to her knees, arms open. The girl flew into them, and the two collided in a tangle of fabric and tears, and the kind of silence that only comes when something broken finally finds its missing piece. Father Tom turned away, blinking fast. Ruthie stepped back, gave them space, then gently shut the door. They stayed like that for several minutes. Then Hannah, still holding Clara, looked up at Tom and Ruthie. "I came back as fast as I could," she said. "I thought I had more time." Tom pulled over a chair. "You're here now. That's what matters." Ruthie moved to the fire, stoked it higher, and poured hot water into a tin mug. "Drink," she said, handing it to Hannah. "You look like you walked from Cheyenne on foot." "I nearly did," Hannah said, accepting it. "Caught a freight part way. The rest, I ran. Hid. Had to." Clara curled beside her, not letting go. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered. Hannah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I promised I would." Ruthie sat across from her, her voice low. "Do you know what Harlan's been trying to do?" Hannah's jaw clenched. "Yeah. I know. You got anything left that can help us in court?" "I've got names. Letters. Originals he thought I burned. Hidden in a locker at the Casper rail station. I left him there before I ran. I just didn't think he'd move this fast." Father Tom nodded. "Elias and the marshal are headed to Casper now. They're going to Judge Merritt." Hannah's eyes sharpened. "Then they'll need me there." "No," Tom said firmly. "You need to stay here with Clara. Let them bring the judge. You'll testify when the time comes. But right now, you're no good to her dead." Hannah looked torn, rage and love warring in her face. "But she's my daughter," she said, "and I'm not hiding again." Tom put a hand on her shoulder. "No one's asking you to. But this war's already started. Let them finish the ride. We'll hold the line here." Ruthie added, her voice low but unwavering. We're not alone anymore. Clara tugged Hannah's sleeve. Mama, did you fight the bad man? Hannah stroked her hair. I ran so I could, and now I'm done running. Later that morning, the town began to buzz. Word traveled fast in Coyote Hollow. Hannah Foster was back, and Harlan Tate was furious. At the inn, he stood in his room pacing, jaw-tight fingers drumming on the windowsill. Bo Granger leaned against the wall, watching. You said she was gone, Tate growled. Bo looked uneasy. She was. She vanished. I don't know how she got back. Tate turned on him. I don't pay you to not know, Bo. She's just one woman, Bo muttered. A scared one at that. Tate's glare was sharp. She's a witness, and now she's a threat. Bo swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? Tate didn't answer. He turned back to the window. Across the street, townsfolk passed quietly, but their eyes lingered. Too long. Suspicious. Protective. Something was shifting. The town was no longer watching him with fear. They were watching him like a cornered animal. I want you, Tate said finally, to remind them who owns this town. Bo hesitated. You mean... Now Tate looked over his shoulder. Yes. Now. While Carter's gone. Bo nodded, but his steps were slow. Back at the marshal's office, Tom sat reading to Clara while Ruthie and Hannah copied the documents she'd hidden in the locker. They worked in silence, but the air hummed with tension. Then the front window shattered. The rock landed hard on the wooden floor, splintering with a thud. Ruthie grabbed the shotgun. Hannah shielded Clara. Outside, 3 men stood grinning in the street. Bo was among them. Father Tom opened the door and stepped out like he had a sermon to deliver. Bo's voice rang out. Evenin' preacher. Just here to give a little reminder who's in charge. Tom didn't flinch. You boys picked the wrong day to come stir trouble. Bo spat into the dirt. You think you and some girls can hold us off? Ruthie stepped into the doorway, shotgun aimed low. I ain't some girl. Hannah stood behind her. Clara, still behind the desk, whispered to herself. Please go away. Please go away. Bo laughed once. You got one shot. That's all. Then I won't waste it, Ruthie said. Bo's face changed. Just then, the sound of horses thundered from the north end of town. Elias and Marshal Whitlock rode in Hard Judge Merritt in tow behind them in a covered wagon. The marshal raised his rifle. Drop your weapons, he shouted. Bo froze. The 2 men with him turned to run. Bo hesitated. Then he dropped his gun. Tate, watching from his inn window, turned away. Slowly. Like a man realizing for the first time that the house he built was catching form. Inside the office, Clara ran to Elias the moment he walked in. He knelt, arms wrapping around her tight. Hannah stood and watched them, tears in her eyes. Ruthie looked at the judge. We ready to end this, Judge? Merritt nodded. Let's bring it all into the light. The courthouse in Coyote Hollow hadn't seen a full gallery in years. Dust hung in the rafters like it was waiting for a reason to fall. The pews were packed now, shopkeepers, ranch hands, mothers with children on their laps, and old-timers who remembered when law still meant something. Elias sat near the front, flanked by Ruthie and Marshal Whitlock. Hannah sat beside Clara, her hand never leaving her daughter's shoulder. Judge Merritt stood at the bench, tall and stern, the weight of his badge etched deep into the furrows of his brow. Across the aisle, Harlan Tate lounged with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. His lawyer, crisp in a charcoal vest and gold-rimmed spectacles, flipped through a stack of well-prepared documents like he already knew the outcome. He didn't. Judge Merritt called the court to order. This hearing concerns the matter of the Foster property deed, the legality of the land transfer to Elias Carter, and allegations against Mr. Harlan Tate concerning predatory lending coercion and illegal guardianship intentions involving a minor. He looked up over the rim of his glasses. We will proceed with the evidence. Whitlock rose, straightened his coat, and stepped forward. Your Honor, we submit copies of the original deed signed by Hannah Foster, as well as written testimony from her confirming the sale was voluntary and legal. In addition, we submit financial ledgers collected from multiple sources that reveal a pattern of unlawful interest rates and threats of personal retribution against clients who defaulted. He placed the thick file on the table with a satisfying thud. Tate's lawyer stood. All circumstantial. Your Honor, the sale was not market value, which suggests coercion, not consent. Miss Foster's signature may be authentic, but her intent is in question. Judge Merritt didn't blink, and Miss Foster is here to speak for herself. A hushed murmur rippled through the room as Hannah stood. Her steps were steady despite the weight pressing down on her. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and met the judge's gaze without wavering. I sold that house for $1, she said, voice clear, because it was all I had left to give. I didn't trust the banks. I didn't trust the law. But I trusted that someone kind would come along. Someone who'd care more about my daughter than money. She turned slightly, glancing toward Elias, then back to the judge. And I was right. The courtroom held its breath. Tate leaned to his lawyer, whispering something. The lawyer rose again. Miss Foster, you were behind on payments. Isn't it true you disappeared rather than face your debt? I didn't disappear, she shot back. I escaped. There's a difference. You were seen on a freight train east. I was being followed by Mr. Tate's men. You claim coercion, but signed no formal complaint. I was trying to stay alive, not fill out paperwork. Judge Merritt raised a hand. Enough. I've heard the woman. Let's move to the financial evidence. Ruthie approached next, clutching her notebook like it was armor. She took the stand, and for the first time in public, she spoke the whole truth. Bo Granger's my brother. He worked for Harlan Tate. I saw the ledgers. I heard the threats. He'd send out boys in the middle of the night to collect more than interest. One family lost their mule. Another, he took their eldest girl for house help. She never came back. Her voice cracked. I kept quiet because I was scared. But watching that little girl curl up by the fire in Elias Carter's cabin, I knew I couldn't be scared anymore. Elias didn't look away. Neither did the judge. The final document presented was a letter, handwritten, dated 6 months prior, from Tate to a now missing loan agent. It detailed what Tate called a collateral fallback plan in case Hannah defaulted. It mentioned Clara by name. The judge read it silently, then looked up. Mr. Tate, he said slowly, this letter, do you deny writing it? Tate stood, calm, hands folded behind his back. I deny the interpretation, not the ink. Business requires contingency. I never acted on anything illegal. Whitlock stood. Yet. Tate smiled faintly. Marshall, you don't understand how the world works. No, Whitlock said. I just remember when it still had rules. Judge Merritt exhaled deep and long. This court finds that the transfer of property was lawful. Mr. Carter retains the deed. The documents provided show a repeated pattern of coercion and financial manipulation. Charges of predatory lending and attempted unlawful guardianship will be filed with the territorial court in Cheyenne. The courtroom erupted, not with shouts, but with gasps and whispered prayers of relief. Tate stiffened. "This isn't over," he muttered. "No, Judge Merritt said, slamming his gavel. But for now, it's yours to reckon with." Outside the courthouse, the crowd spilled into the street. Elias stepped down into the morning light, Clara in his arms, Hannah beside him. Ruthie emerged with a tired smile. "I didn't think I'd live to see it." "You made us see it," Elias said. Behind them, Marshal Whitlock led Tate away in cuffs, not for the crimes yet, but for obstruction. Just enough to hold him. Father Tom appeared by the boardwalk lifting his hat. "I believe the phrase is the truth, don't fear the light." Elias nodded. "It sure doesn't." Clara tugged at her mother's coat. "Are we safe now?" Hannah knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "We're safer than we've ever been." But Ruthie, watching Tate disappear into the holding cell, wasn't so sure. Because men like him never stay down for long. And something in his eyes said he wasn't finished. The sky cracked open with thunder just after dusk, and the wind howled through Coyote Hollow like it knew something wicked had slipped through the cracks. Elias stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the clouds twist above the hills. His fingers curled around the letter that had just arrived, no return address, just a smudge of ink and a crude stamp. Inside, one sentence chilled him to the bone. "You think you've won, but you only pulled one weed. The roots go deeper." It wasn't signed, but Elias didn't need a name. He knew the handwriting. Tate, or someone close to him. Behind him, Hannah was settling Clara into bed. Ruthie sat by the fire, checking the shells in the shotgun, with the same slow rhythm she used to peel apples, calm but alert. Elias stepped back inside and handed the letter to her. "Looks like he's still pulling strings from that cell." Ruthie read it, jaw tightening. "He's got people on the outside." "People who think he still has power," Elias muttered. "Maybe he does." From the bedroom, Hannah appeared in the doorway, her expression taut. "Then we cut the roots." She held out a small, weathered envelope. "What's that?" Elias asked. She didn't answer right away, just opened it and pulled out a photo, faded, torn at the corners. A man with slick hair and a crooked grin. An arm around a woman who looked far too young to be holding a baby. "That's Tate," Elias said. Hannah nodded. "And that's me." "I was 16. Silence fell like a hammer. Ruthie looked away, swallowing hard. "I was desperate," Hannah continued. "My daddy drank, my mama was gone. Tate showed up with his fake promises and too smooth words. Said he could help, said he loved me." Her voice cracked. "I believed him. For about a minute." Elias moved closer. "Did he hurt you?" She didn't look at him. "He made me owe him. That's how he works. Not with fists at first, but with debt, with shame. By the time I knew what he was, I thought no one would believe me anyway. So I ran." Ruthie stepped forward, gentle. "Is Clara?" "No," Hannah said quickly. "Clara's father died in a mining accident before she was born. But Tate never let go. Always found a reason to pop back up. Every job, every town, I'd turn around and he'd be there reminding me that I still owed." Elias looked down at the photo again. "He's blackmailing you. He has records," she said. "Old letters I wrote him. Payments I made when I didn't have any other choice. He kept them waiting for the right time. And now if the courts don't work, he'll go public with lies and twist the truth. He's already starting." Ruthie added. There's a rumor spreading in town. Folks saying you and Elias planned this whole thing to steal the house and Tate was the victim. Elias scoffed. And people believe it. Fear makes people stupid, Ruthie said. And he knows that. Elias paced the floor, the wood creaking beneath his boots. We can get ahead of it, he said. Tell the truth before he does. But Hannah looked unsure. Even if the town forgives me, he won't stop. He's still got connections in Cheyenne, judges, land commissioners, maybe more. If he's got a backup plan, we need to find it. Ruthie raised a brow. Then maybe it's time we go digging. That night, the three of them returned to town quietly under cover of storm clouds. The marshal's office was empty, but Whitlock had left the key in the lantern hook outside the door. Inside, they pulled the jail records, court filings, anything with Tate's name on it. And in a dusty drawer, Ruthie found what they didn't expect, a stack of telegraphs Tate had sent and received over the past 6 months. One stood out. From M. Barrow, Cattlemen's Union Cheyenne to Harlan Tate, Coyote Hollow approved for disbursement. Deed shifts in 90 days. Proceed with transfer. What the hell is this? Elias muttered. Ruthie's eyes went wide. He's not just taking houses. He's moving titles to shell names and flipping them through union-backed banks. Money laundering, Elias said. With cattlemen as cover, Ruthie finished. No one questions those boys. Elias grabbed the page and turned to Hannah. You said he had records, right? Hidden somewhere. She hesitated, then nodded. There's an old storm shelter on his ranch. Locked. He used to call it the vault. I never had the key, but I know where it is. Elias turned to Ruthie. You up for a little breaking and entering? I've been waiting all my life to break something that matters. An hour later, they rode out under the storm's edge, cloaked in shadow and wind. Tate's ranch sat like a fortress on the hill, the porch lights flickering under the pressure of the brewing storm. The barn was empty. The main house dark. They crept around the back, following Hannah's lead, to the covered pit beneath a collapsed tool shed. She brushed aside the boards, revealing the rusted latch of a storm door. It's padlocked, Elias said, pulling gently. Ruthie pulled a hairpin from her braid. So, she picked the lock in under 2 minutes. The doors groaned open, and a blast of damp, musty air hit them. Elias led the way down the narrow steps, oil lantern in hand. Inside shelves, dozens, labeled crates, files, and in the center a steel chest. Hannah's hand trembled as she reached for it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Signed contracts, blackmail notes, a journal, photographs some too dark to look at long. This is it, Elias whispered. This is the route. Suddenly footsteps above. A voice. I told you it ain't over. Tate. He hadn't run. He was waiting. Elias turned, gun drawn. But it was too late. Tate stood at the top of the stairs, a pistol in hand, rage in his eyes. You should have let the past die, he said. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Tate and the others. No, he said. We're here to bury it with you on top. Lightning cracked across the sky, as if God himself was holding judgment. Elias stepped toward Tate, keeping his voice low, calm, deadly. You think we came here with no plan, no backup? You're not the only one who knows how to pull strings. Tate smirked, the pistol in his hand steady. I don't need strings. I've got bullets. Behind Elias, Ruthie slowly shifted her weight, eyes locked on the man above them. In her coat pocket, her hand curled around the cold grip of the small pistol she always carried. Hannah stayed back, shielding the chest full of evidence, heart pounding so loud it drowned the thunder. Put the gun down, Tate, Elias said. It's over. We've got everything, names, transfers, letters. The judge, the marshal, hell, the whole damn town's ready to burn your empire to the ground. Tate's grin widened. Then let it burn. But you go with it. He cocked the hammer. Elias didn't flinch. Let me ask you something, Elias said. All this, all the land, the money, the fear, what does it buy you in the end? When the lights go out and the walls close in, who remembers your name except the ones who hate it? Tate's expression flickered just for a second, and in that second, Ruthie moved. She ducked behind a crate and fired once, the sharp pop of her pistol echoing in the tight space. The shot clipped Tate's shoulder, sending his gun flying. He screamed, stumbled back, and fell halfway down the stairs, crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. Elias rushed up, rifle raised, but Tate was already groaning, clutching his arm, blood blooming through his coat. You're done, Elias said, voice iron. Tate laughed through gritted teeth. You don't even know what you've touched. I know enough, Elias said. Hannah climbed the stairs, eyes locked on the man who had shadowed her life for more than a decade. You ruined lives, she said. You used people's pain like currency. But you never broke me, and you'll never touch my daughter again. Tate spat blood. That little girl's not even worth the paper she. Elias hit him. One punch, swift, controlled, enough to shut him up. They tied him up with rope from the shed, dragged him back to the main house, and waited. Rain began to fall in sheets as the storm reached them in full, but the fire in their blood burned hotter than the sky. By dawn, Marshal Whitlock arrived with a wagon and 3 deputies. He took one look at Tate, tied, soaked, bleeding, and nodded. You boys finally learned to clean up your own messes. We just took out the trash, Ruthie muttered. The marshal opened the steel chest, his face hardening as he read the documents. This is more than enough to bury him, and half the Union with him. You'll need to get it to Cheyenne, Elias said. Fast, Whitlock nodded. I'll leave today. You ride ahead and let Judge Merritt know. I'll send deputies to protect the house until it's all official. Tate slumped in the wagon bed, growled low. They'll come for me. You think I'm the only one? No, Elias said. But you're the one that matters right now. As the marshal's wagon rolled away, Hannah stood by the porch, arms wrapped around Clara, who watched the trail like she knew something important had just ended. Elias stepped beside them. You okay? Hannah nodded. I am now. Clara looked up. Is he gone forever? No one's gone forever, Hannah said gently. But some people don't get to come back. That night the town held a gathering. Not a celebration, no one felt quite like cheering, but a reckoning. Judge Merritt stood outside the church, reading names from the ledgers, honoring the victims, the families silenced by shame and debt. Men and women who thought they'd failed, not realizing they were prey. Father Tom spoke of justice and mercy. Ruthie gave a statement of her own, simple but fierce. If we stay quiet again, we let it happen again. And Elias, after much hesitation, took the small platform and spoke for the first time, not as a witness, not as a protector, but as a man who finally understood what he'd been carrying. I lost my family in a fire, he said, voice rough. I lost my faith after that. Thought maybe I didn't deserve anything good again. But then I met Clara and Hannah, and I realized something. Sometimes God doesn't give you back what you lost. He gives you something to fight for. He looked at them, his family now. Hannah holding Clara's hand, her eyes full of light for the first time since he'd met her. She's not mine by blood, Elias said, but she's mine by choice. And I'll fight for her as long as I have breath. There was no applause. Just quiet nods, tears wiped quickly, and a stillness that meant people had listened. That night back at the cabin, Hannah placed a new picture on the mantel one Clara had drawn. A house, a tall man, a mother, and a girl. The sun was out. The trees were green, and there was no shadow. As the fire crackled and the storm finally passed beyond the valley, Ruthie stood watch by the window. "You think it's really over?" she asked. Elias looked out into the dark. "No," he said, "but I think we've finally stopped running." The first signs of spring came slowly to Coyote Hollow. The snow melted in uneven patches along the hills, and tiny green shoots pushed up through frost-bitten soil as if testing whether the world was finally safe again. The air smelled of wet earth and chimney smoke, and the town, still carrying bruises from the long fight, began to breathe a little easier. At the cabin, Elias knelt by the garden bed he and Clara had started together. His hands were dirty, his sleeves rolled past his elbows. Clara sat cross-legged in the grass beside him, cradling a tin watering can shaped like a duck. "She's thirsty," Clara said seriously, tilting the can with both hands. Elias grinned. "Then give her a drink." She did, slowly letting the water run over the soil, where their first tomato plant poked through. Hannah stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed loosely over her chest, watching them with a kind of still joy that didn't demand attention, but lingered quietly, like the warmth of the sun after a long winter. Ruthie arrived just before lunch, a basket under her arm and a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Brought those books you wanted," she said, setting the basket on the porch. "And a jar of pickled beets because I'm not above bribery." Elias chuckled. "Bribery for what?" She gave him a pointed look. "To come with me to the town hall meeting next week." "You think this town's gonna fix itself? I thought that's what you were doing." "I'm not doing it alone," she said. "Justice doesn't end when the bad guy gets dragged away. It starts when people show up for each other every damn day." He nodded quiet. "Fair enough." Inside the cabin was warmer than ever. The walls now held new shelves Elias had built with Clara, crooked in places, but strong. A photo of Hannah's mother rested beside the drawing Clara had made of their home. Above it, on a scrap of wood carved with care, were the words Father Tom had spoken on that courthouse day. "The truth doesn't fear the light." Father Tom himself had retired from sermons, but not from people. He came by once a week to check on them sometimes, just to sit in silence or read Clara her favorite story again. He said less these days, but every word he spoke felt stitched in gold. Whitlock sent word from Cheyenne 2 weeks later. Tate was facing federal charges. Several cattlemen had been arrested. Others had resigned or vanished. The rot ran deep, but now it had a name, a face, and a paper trail. The land was safe. The deed was final. And Clara was free. One evening as the sun dropped low behind the hills, Elias sat with Hannah on the back porch, watching the last of the light stretch across the field. She leaned against him, her voice soft. "You ever think about what your life was before all this?" "All the time," he said. "But now I think about what it's becoming more." She looked up at him. "And what's that?" He smiled, slow and honest. "Home." They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the crickets and the breeze rustling the leaves. Clara ran out barefoot, a string of wildflowers looped around her wrists like bracelets. She plopped between them and laid her head against Elias's side. "Is it always going to be like this now?" she asked. Elias looked down at her, brushing her hair from her forehead. "No," he said. "It's not always going to be easy. But we'll face it together. And no more bad men," he paused. "There'll always be bad men, honey. But now you've got good people who'll stand in their way." Hannah reached for Clara's hand. We're not running anymore. Clara smiled, closed her eyes, and let out a deep, contented breath. The stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the sky like promises waiting to be kept. Elias watched them, his heart full and heavy in the best way, like something that had finally found where it belonged. He'd bought a house for $1, but what he'd built with it was priceless. Not just shelter, but a sanctuary. Not just survival, but healing. Not just redemption, but love. This wasn't about the deed or the dirt or the man who tried to own both. This was about choosing to stand for something, even when the world says to sit down. It was about opening your door to a little girl who asked, "Are you my new daddy?" and realizing the real answer wasn't in the words, but in every choice you made after. In the morning, Elias would ride to town with Ruthie and help plan a schoolhouse expansion. Hannah would meet with the women's circle to start a fund for families in need. Clara would run through the tall grass, laughing free. And for the first time in a long time, the hollow would feel whole. Because the deepest roots aren't the ones that choke. They're the ones that hold.